Dave Talks Comics, Episode 98, Superman Adventures, Part 1. Welcome to Dave Talks Comics, a program about comic books and cartoons. I talk about comic books I have read and cartoons I have watched. I summarize the stories. My summaries include spoilers. I also talk about how the story struck me, my opinions, insights, and the unanswered questions I have about what I read or watched. On this episode, I'll be talking about a few stories from the 1996 Superman Adventures comic book series. I'll be talking about the stories from issues 3, 1, 9, 11, and 12. That's the order that I read them in, and that's the order that I'll be talking about them. Superman Adventures number 3. The title of this issue is Distant Thunder. And this is cover dated January of 97. This was written by Scott McCloud. The penciler is Rick Burchett. I think that's how it's pronounced. Inker is Terry Austin, and colors are by Marie Severin. Scott McCloud was the writer for about a dozen issues for about a year. He didn't write the first issue. The first issue was written by Paul Dini. And the first issue of Superman Adventures is available online on Comixology for free. The other issues are 99 cents a piece. This issue, if you've seen the cover, it's a Brainiac story. It's basically Brainiac Returns. And I believe it's supposed to be a sequel to Stolen Memories, which is the second story that Brainiac showed up in the animated series. And in case I wasn't clear, this is a book which is based off of the Superman the Animated Series. And the reason why I think it's a sequel to Stolen Memories, which was, I believe, the 8th episode from the first season of Superman the Animated Series, is because it came out just after that episode did. And it makes some reference to a previous encounter between Superman and Brainiac. And I believe that encounter happened in that episode because Lex Luthor was also involved in that, because Superman thought he had destroyed Brainiac, but Brainiac said he was able to something like reconstitute himself or something like that using the machines that Lex, that's probably not the right term, but something along those lines. But he was able to save himself that way by using some of the machines at LexCorp. This is the first appearance of Brainiac in the DC Animated Universe comic books. And this issue was nominated for an Eisner in 1998. I got to be honest, I'm not sure if I would have nominated it for an Eisner. It's a good story, but there's just something weird about the way the story ends. The confrontation between Superman and Brainiac, and Superman basically talks Brainiac down out of doing something drastic. Well, among other things, killing Lois Lane. But so I'm not crazy. It's an okay story. I mean, the art's good, and I bought this issue at Baltimore Comic-Con, and I've got a few more that I want to read, and there's some others. A few more that I bought at Baltimore Comic-Con that I plan on reading, 3 others. And there's some other ones, because I've been going through Comic Book DB and looking at the descriptions for these issues, and also through Comixology, because the entire run of this, which I think is over 60 issues, is all available on Comixology, and with the exception of the first issue, which is free, they're all 99 cents a piece. Now, there are a couple of issues which are now going for big dollars, not crazy dollars, but still considerably more than the 99 cents you would pay on Comixology. Two issues as far as I can determine, and those issues are issue 5, which I believe is the first appearance of Livewire in the comic book, and issue 21, which is the first appearance of Supergirl in the comic book. Now, this is, of course, Livewire and Supergirl from the animated show. So, because I'm not sure if she had sported that look that she had in the animated show in any other comic books at that point. I'm referring, of course, to Supergirl. So, I mean, but we're talking like $30, $50, $100, something like that, which just sounds crazy. But, of course, these issues are available on Comixology for 99 cents. And, like I said, Paul Dini wrote the first issue, which is available for free. And Scott McCloud wrote the next year's worth, issues 2 through 13. Oh, and then there's some issues by Mark Miller. And I don't know if I've ever actually read anything by Mark Miller. I know I've heard him on Word Balloon a number of times. Some of his stuff sounds a little too extreme for me. I haven't read Kick-Ass, which I guess is one of his better-known things from recent years. But I'm kind of intrigued because he wrote about probably 15 or 20 issues, I think, of this series. And some of the issues that intrigue me the most are, I think, the crossovers between Gotham and Metropolis, where you've got Batgirl teaming up with Superman, or some of the, the ones with the villains, particular villains like Luthor and Brainiac. So that's it for Superman Adventures number 3. I feel as though I should say a little bit more about the problem I had with issue 3 of Superman Adventures. And the problem I had was with Brainiac, and it was just the way that Brainiac gave in. In the cartoon, he isn't unstoppable, but he often acts as if he is. He acts supremely confident. And so it was really strange to see him not only capitulate, but also place himself in Superman's custody in this episode. It would have been understandable if maybe he had felt that they had come to a standstill and he didn't feel that he could beat Superman, and he took off and said something like another time. But to see him just kind of give in was really strange. Although, now that I've written that down and I've said that, it occurs to me that maybe this is some sort of a ruse by Brainiac. Maybe he's doing something by giving in. He's somehow going to get access to something that he otherwise wouldn't get access to. Because what Brainiac wanted was the memory globe from Krypton that Superman had. And Superman was threatening to smash it, and Brainiac was taken aback at the fact that Superman would be willing to smash it. And so he hands over his core memories to Superman. It's just really bizarre. But like I said, maybe this is a part of some plan, some plan of Brainiac's to somehow get access to the memory globe. So I went back and I read the first issue of Superman Adventures, which I downloaded through Comixology. This one is called Men of Steel. This is cover dated November of 96. This is written by Paul Dini. The art team is the same as on issue 3. Rick Burchett penciling, Terry Austin inks, and Marie Severance colors. Basically, the story is Superman versus fake Superman, who was created by Lex Luthor, the fake Superman, that is. And I think this is a great introductory issue to this series. And I think it's great because Superman's origin has already been established. There's people in here making reference to the fact that he's a strange visitor from another planet. And I think they actually do use those words. And it's also great because you said a lot of supporting cast in this issue. Most of them do not get a lot of screen time, but you get to see a lot of them. You get to see a number of people from the Daily Planet: Lois Lane, Perry White, Jimmy Olsen. A character that I was not familiar with before reading this, although I must have seen him in a couple episodes on TV, and that's Ron Troop, who's also works at the Daily Planet, another reporter, who also had appeared in comic books before he showed up on the animated series. And then Angela Chen, who, from the research I did, apparently only has shown up in the animated series and in the comic books based on the animated series. As far as cops go, you see Maggie Sawyer and you see Dan Turpin. From LexCorp, you see Lex Luthor, you see Mercy Graves, his assistant slash, what is it she does? She drives him around, whatever that job is called. I don't know why it's slipping my mind. And then from the government, you see General Hardcastle. General Hardcastle is another character who, from the research I did online, apparently only showed up on the TV show, and as far as I can determine, only showed up on 2 episodes of the animated series. He also showed up in a couple episodes of Justice League Unlimited in the whole Cadmus story arc. And then you get, I think, 1 or 2 pages of Smallville even. So you see Ma and Pa Kent. So you get to see all of them in this issue. And it doesn't feel overcrowded. It doesn't feel like they're trying to do too much with it. It's obvious that Paul Dini and Rick Burchett and the rest of the team are trying to, lay everybody out. But they do a great job with the layouts. It really looks like they took their time with this issue. I mean, it is the first issue. It doesn't feel rushed at all. But it's beautifully done. And there's a couple of things, other things I want to point out. You see early in the episode, the issue, you see Lex Luthor wearing a ring with a green stone on it. And later in the issue, Superman crashes into his office, but he doesn't use the ring. I don't think you even see the ring at that point. It's earlier in the issue where you see the ring when he's talking to Mercy Graves. His chauffeur, that's the word I was trying to think of. And the only other thing I want to talk about was I got into looking into some of these characters, and I found some stuff out about Dan Turpin. And I was familiar with Dan Turpin primarily only from the cartoon. And he is killed in the third season of Superman the Animated Series. And he was basically supposed to be a kind of a stand-in for Jack Kirby, and he's got an interesting history. The first time he appears called Dan Turpin is in the 70s, but he's actually supposed to be one of the Boy Commandos, which was a team of characters created back in the 1940s. In 1942, I believe, is when they first appeared. And he is supposed to be the Boy Commando who was known as Brooklyn. And that's all his name was in the Boy Commando series. I don't think he was called Dan Turpin until he showed up in the 70s. So there was about 60 appearances of the Boy Commandos from 1942 to 1949. And then in 1971 and 72, he had a few appearances in the New Gods comic books. The first appearance was in New Gods number 5. And then, at that point, he's called Dan Terrible Turpin. And he also appeared in New Gods numbers 8 and 9. And then that was basically it as far as new appearances. He did show up. There were a number of reprints of both the New Gods and of Boy Commando stories over the next several years. But the next appearance was after Crisis on Infinite Earths, and that was in Superman number 7, the 1987 series of Superman. And then he had quite a few appearances over the years since then. At times he appears more frequently than others, but no huge lulls, no huge, periods where he doesn't appear at all. So I thought that was kind of cool, and I really wasn't expecting to find all that out. I was tempted to dig in and try and dig up some information on some more of these characters that I don't know that much about, but I think I'm going to leave it at that for now. And I still have 3 issues of Superman Adventures that I own that I haven't read, and who knows, maybe I'll download some more in the near future. Superman Adventures number 9, which is cover dated July 1997, is the title of this story is Return of the Hero. It's written by Scott McCloud. The pencils are by Rick Burchett. Terry Austin did the inks, and Marie Severin did the colors. The cover of this issue says Lex Luthor, Man of Tomorrow, Today. And then you have like these news clippings on the cover that show Lex Luthor. Mr. Luthor goes to Washington, Lex appeal, addresses Congress on arts endowment. So it kind of hints that this is going to be a story about Luthor turning good or appearing to turn good. You get a little bit of that in this story, but that's not really what it is. And so in that way, it was a little disappointing. What it is it's a story that's told from the perspective of a teenager, Francisco, who prefers to be called Frank, who has two heroes, Lex Luthor and Superman. And he looks up to both of them. He, in particular, has a problem. He doesn't like the Daily Planet because Lois Lane, he doesn't like it, especially after seeing her grill Lex Luthor about these fires that happen in Suicide Slum, which is the neighborhood where he lives. Because he sees Lex Luthor as somebody who has built himself up, somebody who is trying to do something for Suicide Slum, and he doesn't see the reality or the possibility that Luthor could be the one who is setting these fires, that he can acquire Suicide Slum so he can rebuild it into, gentrify it basically into the neighborhood that he wants it to be. Drive out the people who live there. He also doesn't know that there's a connection between Lex Luthor and his father, who's dead at this point. His father, who went to prison and who died of a heart attack in prison. And as you get through the story, it turns out Luthor didn't cause the heart attack. But he's kind of okay with letting people think that. The other thing he doesn't know is that Luthor had actually promised to look after the family. That Francisco's father, whose name was also Francisco, which is probably why he prefers to be called Frank. Francisco's father had worked for Luthor, but then was caught by the police and went to prison. And Luthor agreed to look after his family, which leads to this little crisis. There's a number of things going on in this story. And one of the things I don't like about this story is that it feels a little too full. It feels like the story needed more room to breathe. It would have been better stretched over either 2 issues or at least a longer issue, or just by eliminating some element, if that's possible, from this story. So basically the story is about Francisco finding out that Luthor's not as honorable as he thought he was, even though he doesn't know anything about Luthor's promise to his father. What I do like about this story is the conversation that Superman has with Francisco near the end of the story, when Francisco has basically lost faith in Luthor because he realizes now that Luthor is the one who's responsible for the fire, including a fire that burns the apartment that he and his mother and his sister live in down. And he talks to Superman about the things that he admires about Luthor without naming Luthor, because I guess he can't bring himself to do that. And Superman actually tells him basically he needs to make up his mind for himself, that there are some admirable qualities about Luthor, that he's somebody who, let me see if I have this in my notes. No, I don't have it in my notes, so let me open up the issue and see if I can find the specific qualities that Francisco names and then Superman agrees with are... Okay, so Francisco says his guts, I guess, the way he could start with nothing and build it into something great, the way he found his own path. And Superman says, those are still great qualities. There's no reason you can't learn from them in spite of his other mistakes, which is something that I really didn't expect to see in a comic book. I mean, it seems like a perfectly legitimate thing to say, but it just seems like the sort of thing that Superman wouldn't say. He wouldn't give any ground to Luthor, it seems like. It seems like Luthor would always be the big bad in his mind, and to acknowledge that Luthor actually has some admirable qualities was actually strange to me. And for that reason, I like that about this comic book, even though the story in the whole wasn't great. And the other thing is that there's a nice moment which actually happens on that same page, which is at the time of this fire, Luthor has traveled to this to make sure that Francisco and presumably to make sure that Francisco and his family are okay. And he's in his limousine, and Francisco sees him, and he sees Francisco, and Luthor, the window goes up, and Luthor says, "Take me home." And I don't know, it's implied that, Luthor knows that he's lost this kid because he had met Francisco. Francisco got thrown in jail at one point for hanging out with some guys who were trying to rob a store during one of these fires. And Luthor had taken him aside and tried to, take him into his fold and make him, Francisco's only a teenager, like high school age, like say 15, 16, something like that, presumably. But Luthor had tried to, say, look, I need people who can keep their eyes open, and he kind of hinted that it was Bruno Mannheim, who's another, gangster, well, who's nothing but a gangster, really, from Metropolis, who, if you watch the animated cartoons, is the one who Darkseid goes to, and is the one that Darkseid gives technology to. And that's the beginning of the involvement of Darkseid and the forces from Apocalypse and eventually from New Genesis. And that's very cool stuff in the animated series. But so Luthor has actually built, there's actually been contact between Luthor and Francisco, and Francisco's admiration for Luthor, he actually has a personal connection there, even if they only met once. But by the end of this issue, of course, Luthor knows that he has failed Francisco, and that's just a nice moment, I think. Instead of using a lot of dialogue or a lot of narration to explain what happened, all you have are the look on Luthor's face and those few words that he speaks. And it's possible I'm misinterpreting it, but so on the whole, this is not a great issue. It's a good comic, and it has some nice touches to it, but there's definitely some other issues of Superman adventures that I would prefer before this one. Superman Adventure issues 11 and 12. These are cover dated September and October of 1997. They are written by Scott McCloud. The pencils are by Rick Burchett. The inks by Terry Austin, and the colors by Marie Severin. This is a two-part story. It is called The War Within. The first part is basically a Superman is dying type story. It opens with Superman saving a bunch of people from a building that's collapsing in Metropolis. And Lois is quickly on the scene, confronting Superman after he saves these people. She thinks he should be doing more to prevent disasters. And soon after that, we see Lois writing a column criticizing Superman. She then goes to Star Labs. I think she already had an appointment at Star Labs. And she shows it to Professor Hamilton. Trying to play up the fact that, why isn't kind of cheering herself on, talking about how good a job she's doing, this is a really good one. Look at all that's wrong, why isn't Superman doing more about this and that? And you could see that Professor Hamilton isn't real happy with it, and he keeps trying to interrupt her, and then he finally reveals the fact that Superman is dying to Lois. That apparently this all dates back to this incident, this fight with Intergang, and he was exposed to kryptonite, but it's some different form of kryptonite, and so Superman is dying. But there is a hope, because there's some mineral called, and let me see, I think it is, hydranium, which can only be found in a country called Protoslavia. And so Superman, so what we see at the end of this issue is that while Superman continues, and throughout this issue we see Superman, even though he's getting weaker and weaker, he continues to fight. He continues to fight the bad guys, most of whom seem to be people who are trying to rob banks. Some of them with superpowered weapons. But, I mean, we don't see any sign of like Lex Luthor or Brainiac or any of the other supervillains in this issue. But we see him having a very hard time with some of these non-superpowered villains, but who have some super weapons. But towards the end of the issue, we find out, of course, about that he's dying, and that there is some hope, that there's this hydranium in war-torn Protoslavia, and that Lois and Professor Hamilton are going to go there to get it, while Superman stays home and continues to fight the good fight. And I thought this was kind of neat, because it wasn't really until I'd reread the issue that I thought of this, but this was kind of like in All-Star Squadron, where the superheroes stayed on the home front and fought the bad guys, and it was the regular guys, men and women, who went to Europe and to the Pacific to fight, the Axis powers there. So I don't know if that parallel was intended at all, but I'm drawing that line. I'm drawing that comparison. There was a few really nice moments in issue 11 that I liked. The first one takes place right after this fight. Right after Superman has rescued these people from this collapsing building, and one of the people he rescues is this little kid and gives this little boy back to his mother, and his mother's very thankful. And then you see Superman taking off and flying off into the distance, and then Clark, of course, shows up, because he's circled around and come back and changed clothes, and in the same panel you see Clark talking to Lois. But then you also see this mother with her kid, and she's saying, if you look real hard, you can still see him. And the kid's saying, nah. I thought that was really funny. Because, of course, he's not still flying off into the distance, because Clark is right there in the same panel. In fact, right in front of the mother and son. Although it's not clear if the son makes the connection that Clark is Superman or not. The second moment that I really liked is just a couple pages later, when Lois is writing this editorial about Superman, talking about how he should be doing more, about how he's not doing enough, and she's so into this, and she's got this evil look in her eyes as she's tapping away at the keyboard at her computer, and Clark's there's one panel where Clark is just watching her tapping away. And in the next panel he's saying, "You look very beautiful today, Lois." And she's like, "Yeah." And she keeps typing, and then Clark kind of takes off, and he's gone. And she stops all of a sudden. She's like, "Wait, what? What did you say, Clark?" But he's gone. And it's just the way they draw it, the way Rick Burchett and Terry Austin, and I think you've also got to give some credit to Maurice Severin, the way she colored it, and it's just the whole look of it. It's just great. The transformation on Lois' face, and the change from being so into writing this article to realizing, wait a minute, did I just miss something? And the third moment is when Lois is at Star Labs, and when she finds out that Superman is dying, and the look on her face goes from she realizes that she's what's really important, and there's this one panel which takes up half a page, where she's just standing there in Star Labs, and it's her from behind. You can't, for the most part, you can't see. I mean, you just see her in silhouette, And she had the pages from this editorial in her hand that she was showing to Professor Hamilton, and the pages have dropped out of her hands, but you can see some of them still floating to the ground, and all the other employees. Professor Hamilton is in the distance, walking through a door, going into another room, and there's other people at Star Labs kind of walking around, doing various jobs, and Lois is just standing there. And you can, once again, it's this transformation that she's gone from this glee of having written this article to just complete dismay. And it's the way it's done. And honestly, it's the colors too, the pink, the green, the yellow, the gray, the black, the red in this panel. It's beautiful. And so those are the three moments that I really like from issue 11. Now, issue 12 picks up with Lois. And this issue has Lois on the cover, running from people who are trying to shoot her. She has a briefcase, which presumably has this hydranium that Superman needs, that they need to make this medicine for Superman. So Superman is still dying. And the issue actually opens with him in the hospital. He wants to leave the hospital, even though his doctor telling him, no, you need to stay here. You're not healthy. It's you're not well. You need to stay here. And but Superman flies off anyway. And as Superman is flying off, the doctor is contacted by Lex Luthor, who we find out then is blackmailing the doctor. And he wants the doctor to make sure that Superman doesn't get better. So Superman is still able to fly, but he's definitely not as strong as he once was. And so we see Mercy, actually it's Mercy who's talking to the doctor, Mercy Graves, Luthor's assistant, and we see Luthor, we see who's that other, I can't think of his name, the other guy who got the weapons from Darkseid. He doesn't play a very big part in this story, but, Mannheim, that's his name. Bruno Mannheim, I think. So then the story kind of flips over to Lois's reports, and we get Lois's reports or her journal from the field, and I like what they do here. They have her reports done in a different text. It's not written just as captions. They're written in their own, they have their own background color. It's their own script. So it's very clear that these are Lois's reports from the field. And this is as she gets the hydranium and then struggles to return to Metropolis with it in time to save Superman. And so she takes off on a plane, and then the plane gets shot down. And so then she has to, try to escape on foot. And eventually Lois arrives. And there's some nice moments in here where Lois, there's some nice moments in here where she tries to escape the various forces, because you see there's a civil war going on in Protoslavia. And eventually she makes it to an airport, she makes it to the United States, she ends up having to get on like an old biplane to get to Metropolis from New York. And there's these great shots of, they end up landing the biplane on a street in Metropolis in order to get to the hospital in time. And so meanwhile, Superman is back in the hospital after getting beat up once again fighting crime. He tries to save somebody who's getting mugged and ends up getting shot by a mugger, and the bullet actually doesn't just bounce off him, it actually goes into him, and he's bleeding. Although it's interesting because they show that in silhouette, which doesn't really surprise me, because there have been times I know when movies, in order to maintain a lower rating, have had to not show the blood. And so you can see in silhouette that there's liquid dripping, and obviously it's blood, but it's not red. And maybe that was something that they had to do because this is a book that's aimed. It's not just a comic book, but it's a comic book that's aimed at kids. So Lois arrives, and Superman Lois arrives with the medicine, and the doctor is getting the medicine ready. At the same time, he's getting these messages from Luthor because he's got this earpiece in. And just before the doctor is getting ready to administer this, and it's really unclear as to what he's going to do. Will he do the right thing? Will he give Superman the medicine, or will he do something to avoid giving Superman the medicine? Superman grabs him and levels with him, and basically tells him, "I know exactly what's going on here. I know that Luthor is trying to, I know what's going on." And so then what you've got is the doctor has this decision to make. He's got Luthor in his ear telling him, "Don't do this. You better not do this." At the same time, he's got his conscience, weighing on him. He's a doctor. He took this oath to help people. They don't say that, but that's kind of what I'm adding in, and what they might have shown in a different kind of story. But, he's a doctor. He's supposed to help people. And, of course, in the end, he does help Superman, and Superman does get better. And the story ends with Lois's journal to end the story. And the other thing that I really liked about the beginning and the end of this story is that... is how it opens and closes with a focus on Superman's chest, with the big red S on Superman's chest. The first issue 11, opens with that, with a close up on Clark taking off his shirt, and the Superman uniform being underneath, and the end of issue 12, the last panel is of Superman flying off, and that very last panel is a focus on, once again, his chest on the big red S. I've already mentioned one of the things that I really liked about this issue, which is the way they use the different fonts, the different scripts for Lois's journal entries. Actually, I've mentioned two things. I also mentioned the doctor's dilemma. Does he help Superman? Doesn't he? And it's not only does he or doesn't he, it's also that they kind of left it hanging. It's not like in the end Superman chases down Luthor and threatens him or takes away whatever things he had on the doctor. You don't see that. So basically the doctor has to make the decision to do the right thing without any promise from Superman that Superman is going to make everything better. But the other thing that I really like, the third thing that I really like, was that this story is that they've reversed roles. You have Lois coming to Superman's rescue, where Superman's the one who's normally rescuing people. So let's see, a couple other things about the art. The visual storytelling is great in this. I just love the way the story progresses. There are some parts where they're obviously fast-forwarding through things, and especially when Lois is trying to escape Protoslavia, you're getting her narration, but you're not getting very much in the way of dialogue. But it's really cool seeing her trek through Protoslavia in order to finally make it to the airport, and the things she does, and trying to communicate with people who don't speak the same language as her. And her use of like the Superman symbol at one point to do that, or really at a couple points to do that. And then the other thing I really liked about the art is one thing that I really haven't mentioned is the way they both draw and color the skyscrapers, the skyline of Metropolis. And I think this is really throughout all these Adventures of Superman issues that I've been talking about so far. But I really like it's just something about the way it's very, I don't know, I hate to use this term because it sounds like I'm just using shorthand for something else, but very iconic, it's beautiful. It's beautiful the way they draw especially like the panel where the biplane is landing on the street, on a big street in Metropolis. And you see the skyscrapers, both the ones that are close up and the ones that are further away, and the way they draw them and the way they color them. It's It's beautiful. This is not the last story of Scott McCloud and Rick Burchett and Terry Austin's running. It's the next to last. There's one more issue. I don't have that issue. I'm not sure if I'm going to read it. The cover bills it as a strange sports issue. There is one other story that I want to read, and that is one that involves criminals from the Phantom Zone. So I may include that on the same episode that these two issues are covered. But anyway, this is a really cool issue if you're a Superman fan, if you're an Superman the Animated Series fan. This is definitely worth a read. I think it compares to any of the other good Superman stories that have appeared in the regular Superman comic books, whether that be Superman or Adventures of Superman or Action Comics. Originally, I had plans to include the story from Superman Adventures issues 7 and 8. I actually recorded a segment on that, but adding that into this episode would make it longer than I want it to be. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to read some more Superman Adventures, and I will package that summary, that discussion of Superman Adventures 7 and 8, along with a discussion of some other episodes or issues of Superman Adventures, and hopefully I'll get that out sometime in the next month or two. That's it for episode 98 of Dave Talks Comics. Dave Talks Comics can be found on the web at davetalkscomics.com and facebook.com/DaveTalksComics. On Twitter at DaveTalksComics. Email can be sent to davetalkscomics@gmail.com. Next time on Dave Talks Comics, I will be talking about Tales of Suspense, Iron Man. I'm Dave. Thank you for listening. This is my second attempt at recording this. I recorded this before, but I wasn't too happy with the way it turned out, so I'm going to try it again.